Hello and welcome to the Young Just Us podcast. My name is Roman and I'm doing an issue-by-issue deep dive into the 1998 run of DC Comics' Young Justice. We are back this week with the second ever episode of the pod, aka episode 0.5, because we are in prequel land. Today I'll be going over one of the prequel stories for Young Justice, specifically Young Justice: The Secret. If you didn't catch my posts, originally I was going to cover JLA World Without Grown-Ups in this episode as well, but I ended up having way too much to say about just The Secret, and World Without Grown-Ups is two 50-page comics, so I really wanted to give that whole story its own episode, room to breathe. So that will be next week's episode. For now, it's just the one comic, Young Justice: The Secret, but before we get into it, just a couple of housekeeping notes. First of all, thank you so much for the early support on this podcast, particularly on Tumblr. I knew already that there's a small but quite dedicated community of YJ98 fans over there, and I hope you guys are liking the podcast. I'm going to do my best to do you guys justice on here, no pun intended. If you didn't know, you can follow the podcast on Tumblr, Twitter, or Instagram, as well as the RSS feed directly. All links will always be in the description or show notes. The best place to get updates is probably the Tumblr. That's also where the episode transcripts will live, but I'm trying to cross-post pretty much everything, so you should be good no matter what. Speaking of social media, my friend Sigrid made an amazing audiogram for me. So exciting, which you can find on the Instagram or the Twitter. Please show it some love. Thank you so much, Sigrid. And Sigrid also pointed out to me that in Terry Pratchett's Mort, which is the fourth Discworld novel, there's a much quoted part where Mort the apprentice keeps asking his master, who is Death, what about fairness? What about justice? And Death basically always responds, there is no justice. There's just us. Obviously, this is relevant because of the name of this podcast. And if you didn't know, the name of this podcast comes from a joke in issue 1 of Young Justice, where they're sort of deciding what to call themselves, and someone calls them, oh, you guys are the Young Justice League of America, and Bart's like, well, no, because they don't really want to be directly associated with the JLA like that. And Bart's like, we're young, but it's just us, like, as in there's no JLA, backing us up. And he's like, right, Young Justice. And he's like, no, Young Just Us. So that's the name of the podcast. But yeah, I wonder if Peter David, the writer of Young Justice, was referencing Terry Pratchett directly or just a coincidence. Either way, I thought it was cool. Wanted to mention it. The last thing I wanted to bring up is just a small correction. Last episode, when I was talking about Superboy, I said he has the name Con-El in Young Justice, but actually the issue of Superboy where that happens came out on December 16th of 1998. So technically, he wouldn't have been called Con-El or Con until at least issue 6 of Young Justice, which came out January 6th of 1999. So I'll try not to, but I'll probably still call him Con or Connor from time to time, even though that's not technically his name yet. Forgive me. Doing this podcast is so nerve-wracking because I'm always afraid I'll get an angry email like, well, actually, you're completely wrong about everything and you have no business talking about comics, idiot. So I try and triple check everything, especially names and dates, but alas, I am only human. And speaking of mistakes, the actual last thing I have to mention is that the audio was quite low on the last episode. I'm so sorry about that. It's still okay for me if I just turn up my actual volume a little bit. So hopefully you guys can do that too. I've tried a bunch of different things and I did manage to up the input volume a little bit, but it was already quite high. I'm also on a different setting of my actual microphone, and to me it sounds much better, but please let me know. I'm also a pretty quiet speaker, I speak at a low volume naturally, so I'm also just literally trying to talk a little bit louder. I'm also going to up the volume in my editing software before I post, and that should actually fix the problem. But if it sounds too bad and there's a lot of buzz, which is typically what happens when doing that, upping the volume post-recording, I might just have to get a new microphone. This one is pretty old. And this is my first podcast ever, and I'm doing everything by myself, so please bear with me. But yeah, hopefully this episode should be much, much better than the last one. So let's get into Young Justice: The Secret. The synopsis on DC Universe Infinite reads as follows. Robin, Impulse, and Superboy capture a young girl, Secret, who is a gaseous being, but let her escape in secret. This is the first first team-up of Young Justice. Indeed it is. Todd DeZago wrote Young Justice: The Secret, Todd Knock did the pencils, Larry Stucker on inks, Jason Wright on colors, Ken Lopez on lettering, the art studio Digital Chameleon on panel separation, and Eddie Berganza as editor with Dana Curtin as associate editor. Leonard Kirk and Carl Story contributed to the cover art, which I actually love. It's this purple background with the red and yellow silhouette of Secret. It's very mysterious and cool. I really like it. So the way I'm going to do this is I have a scene-by-scene breakdown of just like straightforwardly what happens, like a recap, and then my own notes, which are comments and opinions, which I'll put in between each scene. So like I'll describe what happens in a scene and then I'll just talk about my opinion on it. I might also stop and talk about specific panels, which I'll put up on the screen in the YouTube version of this episode, but feel free to just listen. I'll try and describe everything in pretty good detail. This format may change as I go along and like figure out what works and what doesn't, but for now this is how it'll be, so I hope you enjoy. And feel free to read along with me. In the first scene, Robin is being interrogated by someone off-page. They tell Robin that the situation is very serious, he's angered all the wrong people, and he and his quote-unquote friends were right in the middle of it. They ask for his detailed account of what happened. Robin agrees and says that it started the night before when he became curious about the military convoy passing through Gotham in the middle of the night. Robin continues his account and we see what happened through flashbacks. Robin says it wasn't until the next night when he heard about a town being evacuated that he decided to go upstate and figure out what was going on himself. That was his plan, he says, but he unexpectedly ran into Superboy and Impulse once he got there. In the flashback, Superboy says he saw the news on CNN, and Bart says he saw it on MTV News. They kind of give him a look, and he says, "What? You hear it first." Robin, in the present, says because of the other two's indiscreet arrival, unlike him, the DEO, which is the Department of Extra-Normal Operations, and the U.S. military came to greet them. The boys tried to offer their services, and while reluctant, Dr. Charles, the head of the DEO, agreed to let them help, considering that they had no other options. In the flashback, Dr. Charles explains that they were in the process of transferring a, quote, highly volatile creature when it escaped through a fissure in the tube they were holding it in. He also explains that it's a gaseous entity that can poison and kill people with ease. Apparently, it killed several people before escaping into the wilderness of the town they're in now. In the present, Robin says that the DEO ordered an evacuation of the neighboring town with a hazmat cover story. So, as you can probably tell, this is a non-linear story. It'll mostly be told through flashback, as Robin, Superboy, and Impulse talk about what's already happened because they're being interrogated. I'll save the surprise of who they're being interrogated by for the end, but Robin, Impulse, and Superboy all look so cute here. I mean, at this point, Todd Knox's style is like home to me because I've read so much Young Justice, and I love their haircuts here. Wish we could have kept them, but we'll get to that when we get to it. This is also our first run-in with DEO, of course. We'll be seeing a lot of them throughout the run. I love the name, Department of Extra-Normal Operations. Like, it's very whimsical, but still perfectly ominous. Very Men in Black coded. But I like how we don't know for sure at this point that they're completely evil. Like, we're definitely suspicious, but as Dr. Charles talks through the explanation, we see a panel of like a really scary gas monster and terrified scientists, like a visual representation of how he wants the boys to interpret the story. And as a reader, you're kind of also like, oh yeah, seems really scary. Like, I hope they get it. Like, you get the sense that the DEO is definitely using Young Justice, but not that they're up to anything like particularly nefarious yet. The relationship between DEO and Young Justice is complicated and will basically only grow more so throughout the run. In the first flashback panel, Superboy calls Robin Wonder Boy, which is his nickname for Robin. And look, like, I don't know the origin of this, probably in an issue of Superboy that I just haven't read. So maybe it's really cute, but it just always makes me do a double take because obviously Robin is traditionally called Boy Wonder, not Wonder Boy. So it just makes my brain kind of short circuit every time I read Wonder Boy. Like, hey, that's not Boy Wonder. And later in this very issue, he just calls Robin Wonder. Just Wonder, which, like, that's not a nickname. Like, it's an adjective. As far as I remember it, this pretty much stops once Peter David takes over writing, so, small mercies. It's just such a strange choice to have him call him. I mean, I kind of get Wonder Boy, but Just Wonder is a little bit strange. In the second scene, we move to Superboy in the present, also apparently recounting the story to his interrogators. He picks up where Robin left off, explaining that Lutwidge, the military representative, seemingly didn't want their involvement, but was overruled by Dr. Charles, and the boys were given permission. Lutwidge told them that they had 2 hours max, and he'd call in an airstrike after that, whether the boys were still there or not. The boys are given a radar locator, and then head into the evacuated town. Robin is getting nothing on the radar device, and Bart offers to go quickly canvass the whole area, but Robin points out that they need a proper plan, and to work together as a team, like the Justice League. Superboy, narrating, says he volunteered to do a stealthy flyover of the area, but in the flashback we see that it's actually Robin's idea that Superboy initially objected to. Superboy says, "Hey, wait a minute, who died and made you Lex Luthor? You're not the boss of me." Robin reasonably says Superboy has to do it because he's the only one who can fly. He says, "Look, you know you have to do it. This requires a little stealth, so that rules out the Tasmanian devil here. You're the only one who can do this, so let's not argue just to argue, okay?" And Superboy agrees. Robin has trouble getting Impulse to properly follow instructions, and once he's off, Superboy and Robin joke about having to be Impulse's parents, if and when they grow up to be in the Justice League. Apparently, Superboy would be the mom. That's the end of scene 2. Okay, so I think now is as good a time as any to address the Tim-Con-shaped elephant in the room. If you don't know, Tim-Con is the ship name for Tim Drake and Con-El, or Connor Kent, aka Superboy. This is one of the most popular ships in DC fandom for a lot of reasons, but the characters have a long history together, including some very dramatic stuff that happens later on in the timeline. The ship definitely didn't come out of nowhere, and there's plenty of canonical fodder for them, including here in Young Justice. I like Tim Con, but I'm not necessarily like a diehard Tim Conner or anything. I'll just be noting when their relationship comes up because even without a romantic component, they have a really complex and interesting dynamic, particularly here in Young Justice. But yeah, the mom and dad comment was kind of crazy. We also get to see a bit of the friction between Robin and Superboy in the context of working together on a team. I think Superboy really hates being told what to do. He kind of has a history of hating it when people try to control or label him. This makes sense because of the fact that he's a clone, like a glorified science experiment. His first name was literally Experiment 13, and he's had his whole identity and future pre-written for him without having any say. And combined with his arrested development, halted at the equivalent of 16 without the possibility of getting older or maturing. Yeah, that's a lot of his choice and agency being taken away from Jump, so I completely understand how Tim's matter-of-fact manner of leading and giving instruction would rub Superboy the wrong way. And Tim, of course, is just doing what Batman taught him to do: take control of unstable situations, think logically, delegate, etc. He can't see why anyone would object to his perfectly logical ideas and plans. This dynamic of Tim as a good planner and like idea guy, but not a great communicator, comes up a lot throughout this run, so just flagging this early. And I also thought the line where Superboy's like, "Who died and made you Lex Luthor?" is interesting because that implies he still thinks of Lex as the boss of him. I guess because Lex runs Cadmus at this point and Superboy still feels beholden to that. But it's also just a funny thing to say because, well, Lex Luthor would have obviously had to die to make someone else be Lex Luthor. But yeah, we'll get to see the dynamic between Tim Con, or Robin, and Superboy develop and evolve throughout the series. I also want to mention when they first get to the town, Superboy is describing in narration what the evacuated town is like. And in narration, he makes a comment like, "It was so quiet, even emptier than a showing of The Postman," which, if you don't know, The Postman is a movie that came out in 1997, a year before this comic, starring Kevin Costner, about like a post-apocalyptic United States, and Kevin Costner finds a USPS uniform and like sparks a movement to restore America to its former glory or something. It was apparently quite maligned at the time of release. It made back less than half its budget at the box office and won 5 Razzie Awards, including Worst Picture. I have in fact seen this movie, and I remember it being a little boring, but not like awful, and my mom really likes it, so I've decided to take personal offense to this. What's your beef with the postman, Todd DeZago? Answer for your crimes. And towards the end of the scene, Robin tells Impulse to do something, and I said this on the last episode, but I really do headcanon Bart as being ADHD and autistic, and this is the first instance in Young Justice of him doing this thing he does a lot, where because he has super speed, his body can literally move as fast as his brain, which is also quite fast. Like, I'm sure anyone listening with ADHD can imagine how super speed would combine with their symptoms. So a lot of the time when someone is telling Bart to do something, they phrase it like, "Hey Bart, I need you to go to this place and before they can finish, Bart has already followed the first part of the instruction and gone wherever they said to go, and then realized once he got there that he didn't know what to do and came back to hear the rest of the instruction." So Robin says, "Hey, Impulse, I need you to go down to the DEO compound," and Bart takes off, and then, within a second comes back and is like, "And do what?" It's a funny gag that, gets me every time. The idea of Robin and Superboy being Impulse's parents is also interesting. I think there's something about Bart that kind of inspires a parental impulse, no pun intended, and a lot of people, he's just always so reckless or in very precarious situations. You just want to be like, "Are you okay?" Which he usually is. He's doing his best, The next scene is Impulse in the present, continuing the story, also being interrogated. And I didn't mention this before, but the three of them are all being interrogated separately in different rooms and maybe even at different times, I suppose to make sure that their stories all match up with each other. Bart is briefly berated by his interrogator to take the situation seriously, and he sits up straight instead of being draped across the chair. He nervously continues, saying that Robin sent him back down to the DEO compound to get a containment unit for the escaped creature. He grabs one hastily in the flashback, unaware that it's actually a defective one. When Bart gets back, Superboy has found the perfect vantage point over the town and brings the other two up with him. Robin explains the plan he's come up with, which took forever, according to present Bart. Bart's job is to run around town, essentially beating the bushes to get the creature to come out of hiding. He does this and is successful. The creature jumps out at him in the graveyard, a big, scary, gaseous beast. Robin and Superboy see this happening and come down to execute the plan. Bart begins making a whirlwind around Superboy with Robin standing by. In the narration, Impulse seems to think that Robin had this in the bag, but when we switch back over to Robin's interrogation, he doesn't seem so sure. Impulse says Robin had it figured out perfectly. It couldn't go wrong. But Robin says, "I wasn't really sure it was going to work. I just kept hoping we were using our resources to the best advantage." In the flashback, Superboy is in the middle of the whirlwind, braced with the canister using his tactile telekinesis. The creature is drawn down into the canister by the force of the whirlwind, while Superboy stays still. It works perfectly, and they capture the creature, but Superboy seems to notice something while looking at the canister. In the interrogations, all three boys are asked prodding questions. If they're sure nothing strange happened after the capture, all three hesitantly answer in the affirmative, but in flashback, Superboy shows the other two what he noticed, that the quote-unquote creature they captured actually looks like a human girl. So yeah, Bart kind of messes up by grabbing a defective containment unit, but honestly, why wouldn't DEO have just given them one in the first place? And it all works out in the end, so no harm, no foul. We also clue in here that the DEO probably has bad intentions. Dr. Charles is talking about making sure that their little accident is in place, which is very suspicious. I love the plot device of the simultaneous interrogations. It's very cinematic. It's also great to see them doing their first real mission together, Robin coming up with a plan and the team executing it. It's also interesting that Bart and probably Superboy, though he never says, have the utmost confidence in Robin's plan, and Tim is just sort of like, "I don't know, I tried my best." Some of Robin's insecurity coming through there. Good old speedster whirlwind never gets old, of course. I feel like I haven't watched the CW Flash in forever, but I feel like that's how every episode ended. It's also really cool that Superboy was able to use his TTK to not get swept up in Bart's whirlwind. I think it's a really cool and demonstrative, effective TTK to show how it works. So yeah, now let's meet the titular secret. In the next scene, which is a flashback, we see Secret explain to the boys from within the canister that she's been a ward of DEO for as long as she can remember. They hate her powers and tried to find a way to use them for their own means. She discovered at some point that she could escape her room and explore the facility, which she did, finding dozens of other extra-normal children like her being studied, tested, and abused. When DEO found out what she knew, they decided that she knew too much, and they had to send her to WABE, WABE, which she knew was where subjects went and did not return from. Her escape tonight happened during her transfer to the WABE. She begs the boys to help her. They discuss amongst themselves, Superboy expressing his confusion about who to believe, but Robin has deduced that the DEO was lying to them earlier, with Dr. Charles calling the creature she rather than it at one point, and Robin also points out that it's strange that only some of the troops and DEO employees were wearing full equipment if they were so worried about such a deadly gaseous creature. He thinks that Secret is probably being genuine. They decide to help her, but meanwhile, Impulse has been the only one that's noticed Secret escaping the faulty canister. They ask why she didn't just immediately escape in the first place if she could all along, and she says she wanted them to believe and trust her. She says, "I need your help. I need some friends." She apologizes for scaring them and explains that if they turn her over to Dr. Charles, he'll say he's mixing her with oxygen to calm her down, but really he'll be mixing her with potassium chloride to kill her. She's very scared, and the boys try unsuccessfully to comfort her. Oh, poor Secret. We won't learn the rest of her backstory until later, but it truly only gets worse. The shady government organization experimenting on kids with powers trope is tried and true, but I think it works here for what they wanted to go for. I love Robin being a smart guy detective, and Impulse being the only one actually paying attention to Secret to notice her getting out of the canister. Her genuine plea for friendship is really kind of moving and really foreshadows the fact that the strength of Young Justice really comes from their true bonds of friendship, rather than any particular superpowers or specific plans. I also love that Bart consistently has a demonstrably high EQ. He's usually quite sensitive to people's emotions, despite being completely oblivious to other things. Superboy is actually the one to be too blunt and make Secret cry, while Bart is very empathetic. Hands over his mouth as he listens to her story, he's so horrified. And he's also really annoyed with Superboy for being so crass and upsetting her. I think that's interesting because you wouldn't necessarily expect that to be the case. You might expect Bart to be socially oblivious, but I love that he kind of has a high empathy. I'm going to continue to track this aspect of Bart's character. I just love him so much. He has layers, There's also a cute moment where Robin tries to hold Secret's hand to comfort her, but he can't because she's incorporeal. In the present, when asked if they simply captured the subject and promptly handed the container over, Bart says yes. We see them doing this in flashback. The DEO agents test the container and get positive results for Secret's presence, and just as Secret said he would, Dr. Charles says he's mixing her with oxygen as a sedative, but when he does begin pumping in what is presumably potassium chloride, it causes a huge explosion. The boys seem shocked, and the DEO agents definitely are, unable to answer when Robin asks what just happened. In the present, the boys are asked if there's any chance that the subject survived. They all look apprehensive. In the flashback, the boys have met up a bit later, and we see that Robin used one of his smoke capsules to fool the DEO agents, and they let Secret out of the glass bottle where they'd been hiding her. She's ecstatic to be free, and Bart asks her name, to which she replies that she's going to find that out on her adventures too. After she's gone, Robin says that she's only free if she stays quote-unquote dead, so they have to keep this only amongst themselves, a secret. Presently, we see all three boys say that the subject was probably killed in the explosion. So, yeah, I'm assuming that Tim put one of his smoke capsules in the containment unit rather than Secret, knowing that it would explode if it came into contact with potassium chloride, thus making DEO assume that Secret is dead. But I wonder how they made the test read positive for Secret. I don't know. Questions that are above my pay grade, honestly. Point is, they were never going to turn Secret over, so good for them. Hooray for new friends! I also think having Secret as a name or a superhero identity is actually so sick. Fellow non-binary people out there, we should name ourselves Secret. I want to see more secrets. It's also so sweet how truly ecstatic she is to be free. I can't even imagine living a life in containment. And then it's also quite touching how seriously Tim and company are taking the responsibility to protect that freedom for her, to the point that they'd lie to the Justice League, which, yeah, that's who's interrogating them, by the way. We'll find out on the next page. Speaking of. In the last scene, we see the JLA, Superman, Max Mercury, Flash, and Batman over video gathered, discussing the interrogations. Flash asks if they're agreed that they'll tell the DEO the boys have been debriefed and there's nothing to be concerned about, that the boys' stories all check out, and they all believe that the subject's death was completely accidental and that the DEO could in no way be held accountable for it. Superman points out that the DEO seem very worried about being held responsible for that death, and he wonders if they should be suspicious. Max points out that the boys weren't suspicious, and he's satisfied with that. Flash agrees that their stories all match and asks Batman for his opinion, who says he doesn't trust the DEO, having dealt with them before, and that their methods leave much to be desired. He says, "They're good kids. They certainly know right from wrong. Whatever happened, I'm sure they did the right thing. And if, for some reason, they couldn't tell us the entire truth, well, we all have our little secrets, don't we?" Batman ends his video call on that note. It is so corny to end on that last word from Batman, but I love it. I mean, this issue very much feels like an episode of the show, probably more so than any other issue of Young Justice. Probably just because they literally did adapt the storyline in the show, but still, it feels very episodic, and it's tied up pretty neatly by the end. That line from Batman in particular just feels like exactly the sort of last note an episode of the Young Justice show would end on. Batman, of course, the GOAT for being mistrustful of government agencies and putting his faith in the kids. Because, like, truly, who is Batman to judge? He has a mountain of, as he says, secrets. It's also interesting that the only JLA members present are the heroes directly or indirectly responsible for Impulse, Superboy, and Robin, respectively. I guess because they are the ones that would be called when their charges get in trouble. But yeah, guys, that's the comic. Please let me know what you thought in the comments or on social media. I think it's a great jumping off point for the team. Even though we definitely need JLA World Without Grown-Ups to get us where we need to be, like, plot-wise and character-wise. But I'll be talking about that next week. For now, please follow the pod on Twitter, Tumblr, or Instagram, or on the RSS feed directly to never miss an episode, and email any comments or questions to yjupodcast@gmail.com. All links will be in the description or show notes below. Thank you so much for listening, and remember, it's not Young Justice, it's Young Just Us.